And with that, the Prime Minister leaves the podium and heads out of the large dining room in Downing Street and back down, presumably to his office. This is a big moment in Britain's response to the crisis in the Middle East after nearly 2 years of war. This is, I think, the first time that the British government have said to Israel, if you do not do this, we will do that. The this is that they want Israel to take substantive steps to bring in aid, to make steps towards a ceasefire, and to end the siege that has stopped aid getting in. Or Britain will, by the UN General Assembly, recognise a Palestinian state. The Prime Minister telling his cabinet this afternoon that it had been this government's long-standing position that recognition of a Palestinian state was an inalienable right of the Palestinian people, and that we, the government, would recognise a Palestinian state as part of a process to peace and a two-state solution. This is being presented as a threat to Israel, which is, I think, the first time that the British government have offered that kind of threat. Yes, they've taken sanctions on various parts of the Israeli state, including Israeli politicians. They've withdrawn licenses for various arms, but this is a diplomatic threat now to the Israeli administration to say, if you do not get the aid in, if you do not get a ceasefire process underway, a two-state peace process underway, Britain will recognise the state of Palestine. What actual difference is that going to make on the ground? We'll get into the details in a few moments. Let's pick up first on the political fallout. Natasha Clark is LBC's political editor. A moment, this, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I think that actually looking at those demands that Keir Starmer has just set out in the last few minutes, it leaves me quite sceptical as whether they actually can be met. And I think that really goes to show that all of these things, so Israel taking steps to agree to a ceasefire, We've tried and failed at that, making clear there will be no annexation in the West Bank, agreeing to long-term peace, releasing all the hostages, signing up to a ceasefire, accepting that Hamas will play no role in governing Gaza and disarming. That feels like a very high bar to me. So that feels like this is today Keir Starmer saying, I want to recognise the state of Palestine and I'm essentially going to recognise the state of Palestine. And you're right, it is putting pressure on Israel. It is putting pressure on Israel in a way that I don't think the government has been doing before and I think has been slowly ramping up over the last 6 months to a year. The language that's coming out of cabinet ministers like David Lammy, like the Prime Minister, in the last few months has clearly ramped up. There has been a step change in the UK's approach to Israel. And I think what has been clear that's happened in the last few days, he's obviously spoken to President Trump about this. It feels like President Trump, even though the US does not agree with this, and I think it was Marco Rubio last week that made it very clear that they did not believe that this was the right thing to do, it is clear that he has got some sort of nod, tacit approval from Donald Trump in the last 24 hours that they can press ahead with what they believe this plan to be. Whether Donald Trump and whether the US administration will play ball on this, probably not, is the feeling that I'm getting. It feels to me that it is going to be a European-led approach. Number 10 talk about the E3, so that's France, Germany and the UK spearheading this sort of thing. But yeah, absolutely, this has been a long-standing Labour policy. It's been a long-standing government policy. But why now? The intolerable situation in Gaza, that's what the Prime Minister just mentioned, and also him saying the possibility of a two-state solution, he says, is now reducing. So I think a number of reasons why this has increased the pressure on the Prime Minister, but two things. Obviously, it's Macron, and of course, it's his own backbenchers signing that big letter that we saw last week too.
And if it's the case that Donald Trump does not follow through with the Europeans, with the E3, with Britain, France and others, on recognising a Palestinian state, one wonders then how Keir Starmer is going to judge by the UN General Assembly in September whether or not Israel has met the bar that Britain has set, that Israel has to jump over in order for Palestine not to be recognised as a state by Britain. If Trump doesn't follow through, there might be a view in Israel that says, who cares?
That is the risk, and I think that is probably quite likely, actually, if the E3 and France, Germany and the UK decide to push this plan and Israel go, well, so what? You've not got the US behind you, so we don't care. There is a risk that this all falls apart. And actually then I think there is a risk that people look at Keir Starmer and go, well, why are you doing this? This is just a symbolic attitude to try to get you to appease your own backbenchers. I don't think that's the case. I think that this is something that Keir Starmer genuinely feels strongly about, genuinely wants to press ahead with. But equally, he is being bounced into it partly by the pressure on his own backbenchers and the pressure from other political parties. But equally, if the Prime Minister can force a so-called coalition of the willing around this and really start to build the momentum, there are people making this case on the world stage. They are going to use the UN General Assembly, so that's on the 9th of September. So there's not long, really. It's 6 weeks. He's setting himself a deadline. I'm not quite sure the bar will be reached, and I do think this very much seems to me that this is now going to be nailed on.
Natasha, thank you very much indeed. Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor, reacting to the statement from the Prime Minister you've just heard on LBC in the last 10 minutes or so. Let's speak to James Mathewson, who's a former spokesman to the chair of the Labour Party. Thanks for coming on, James. Your reaction to what the Prime Minister has just announced?
Yeah, it certainly is a moment, as you've rightly pointed out, Tom. I think it's one of these things where Keir Starmer has definitely been pressured into this, but it's the Donald Trump connection that I find most fascinating of all. This is one of the things that he was open to talk to Trump about, which he had briefed in advance. Downing Street had said, obviously, that they wanted to have the Gaza conversation with Trump and be part of that. But it just seems to me like it's too little, too late. And the symbology of it, this idea of, we're going to do this. We're going to use the idea of a Palestinian state as a threat.
Yeah.
Just seems disgusting to me. And I think, honestly, most people will have their stomach turned a bit by this, because really, when you look at it, you think these are the Palestinian people. It's their inalienable right to have a state and to have state representation. And it's come down to the wire, and he's using it as a threat to get Israel to stop killing them. It just seems absolutely, mind-blowing in my mind that we've reached that point.
That does seem to be a slight contradiction in the position. And I read again from the minutes of the Cabinet meeting. Long minutes. We don't normally get very long, detailed minutes from Cabinet meetings these days, but we have on this occasion, given the extraordinary nature of the meeting. The Prime Minister said it has been this government's long-standing position that recognition of a Palestinian state was an inalienable right of the Palestinian people. Yet, as you point out, James, it is conditional, apparently, on Israel meeting various parts of what the British government want it to do, like a ceasefire, steps towards a two-state solution, what have you.
Yeah, exactly. It's their inalienable right. Therefore, it should be their right regardless of whatever Israel thinks, whatever Israel wants. Yet it is being used as a stick with which to try and threaten Israel to stop killing Palestinians, innocent Palestinians who are lining up for food trucks even. It's absolutely ridiculous. And I think, if he's using this in any way to try and quell frustrations and rebellion, imminent rebellion in the Labour movement, from the trade unions, the pressure's growing, from the backbenchers, it's not going to work, because they're going to be sickened by that language, I would imagine.
He did talk about Hamas. He, of course, talked about Hamas releasing hostages. He talked about Hamas playing no role in the future governance of a Palestinian state, or indeed of Gaza itself. Do you think that this is going to help? And it's a second-order issue, really, but do you think this is going to help Keir Starmer domestically in the politics that he's got within the Labour Parliamentary Party and perhaps within the membership?
No, I think he's still trying to walk a tightrope. I think he's trying to please everybody. I think he's trying to come down the middle on so many issues. And look, I understand it. I understand that governing is a balancing act a lot of the time, and compromise is required. I'm not a rabid lefty who doesn't agree with pragmatic approaches. However, there's just zero ideology driving this government. There's zero narrative coming out of it that people can look at and say, I know what Keir Starmer stands for, I know what the Labour Party and government stands for. The wider Labour movement's incredibly frustrated by that, but the biggest frustration is the British public, and the only beneficiary of this, Nigel Farage.